All right, welcome back to the shop. Today we've got a pump that was sent to us. We don't know what's wrong with it, but we're gonna tear this completely down, see if we can find what the problem was. I don't even know what the symptoms of the machine were. But what we have is a hydrostatic pump out of a manual drive machine. And really the purpose of this video is to see how to tear this pump down, see what's inside, what components are in there, what can go bad, and just really to identify all the different relief valves and plugs and just parts inside. So let's get in there and see if we can find out what's wrong with it. So let's start by splitting this pump in half. So what this is basically two individual pumps bolted together. One's your left drive, one is your right hand drive. So what we're going to do is just pull these 4 bolts around the outside, and that's how we split our case. Okay, with their case split in half, I'm going to take the left half of the pump and kind of just set it to the side. And what we'll look at is what we call, this would be the right half of the pump. So you can see in between here, there's really nothing that's, other than some O-rings, which are on the opposite half. We've got our pump shaft coupler. This is what couples the left and right side together. Now what we'll do is around the top here, we've got 4 more bolts, and that's going to allow us to get down to our rotating group. And we'll just take this part of the pump off, and we'll look at this in just a minute, but this is our valve plate here, and this is really what we want to look at for damage when we really start inspecting this. But our valve plate is kind of just, well, number one, it has a dowel pin here that aligns it. And you see these cuts right here, these are actually relief cuts, and that's what makes that smooth transition of oil, so it's not like an on-off real hard. It gives it a smooth transition. So these relief cuts in here are not damaged, they're supposed to be there. And then this is just, see, I kind of had to pull on it, but really it's just the glue, or I say the glue, it's the oil that acts like a glue that holds that plate in place. So set our valve plate, and then we're just going to set our end of our pump off to the side for a minute, and we'll look at that a little closer. But let's just set our valve plate over here for now. And now we're going to pull out our rotating group. So this is our rotating group. These are our slippers. Well, let's just go ahead and take it all the way apart, because we've got basically a cylinder block that acts like a distributor. And then we've got our pistons in here. There's 9 of them. Most pumps are going to be 9. Of course, there are 7 piston pumps, but most common is a 9. So we've got our piston retainer plate in here. See, these pistons will come out of our piston retainer plate, just like that. So what we're looking for on this is we're looking at the slipper here, and I don't know how well this camera is going to pick it up, but there is some cuts and some grooves in this slipper. So this one definitely, is not good. We see there's a tiny hole right in the center. So that's where actually hydraulic pressure comes out that center hole right there and allows that piston to float across its thrust plate that's still down in there. We'll take a look at that, but hydraulic pressure forces out of there, and it kind of just lifts this up a little bit. Although that slipper is still making contact, it keeps the pressure off of it and acts like just basically a hydraulic cushion for that to slide around and rotate on its plate. So we'll just take a look at all these slippers while we're in there, and they've all got cuts and damage to them. So, and really even the pistons, I don't know if this pump's been rebuilt before, or it's just, it just looks really, the chrome is just not real clean. It's just like it's really worn. So I don't know, it just seems like this is like a contamination issue, dirty hydraulic oil, because I don't see a major failure yet. But there is enough wear till we know that these pistons are probably not good, and there's probably too much play where the piston goes into. Now we got our spherical, our half washer, and we got 4 pins here. And then there's a spring that these pins sit on top of, so really this washer is spring loaded down in there. So when we put this back together to hold these pins and everything in place, what we do is we use grease, and we'll grease up these pins real good, and that grease will hold everything into place while we put this pump back together. And like I said, this is spring. Get this to sit on top of those pins. Anyways, I need some grease in there to kind of hold them in place. But it's spring loaded, so when we bolt that pump back together, and I've shown this in another video, that there is going to be a little bit of spring pressure that kind of pushes this outer plate up, and that's where that spring pressure is coming from, inside here. So we'll take our 4 pins and our washer and set them off to the side, along with all of our pistons, and then our cylinder block as well. Inside here is the spring. I'm not going to take that apart, but it does have like a little spiral clip right here, because that's a really thick spring. There's a lot of pressure on it, so I'm not going to take that apart. But really that's all there is to the distributor section. So when you replace this, you would replace this as a whole one-piece unit. It all comes together, your pistons, your cylinder, everything. So now, continuing to look at the right side of the pump, we're going to go ahead and get this swash plate out. But before I get the swash plate out, there's one thing that I do want to take a look at. And that's this surface right down here. You can even see the round hole, or where the slippers were sitting. So the slippers run on this plate. Let's see if I can get it up, because I talked to somebody who rebuilt a pump. What I'll do is we'll get this apart, but what this is a very thin thrust washer, or thrust plate that sits on top of the swash plate. And like I said, I talked to somebody who put a pump together that was sitting for a long time that someone else disassembled, and somehow that thin plate went missing, or whatever happened, and stuff like that happens when things sit for a while. But when they put the pump back together without that, he was fighting low charge pressure issues, and it's because he did not have that plate inside. So we're going to pull this lower plate off of our, this is where our lower swash plate bearing will be. See, we got the plate, and we got like a square cut seal that goes around that. And then we should be able just to push this bearing out. So here's our lower bearing, and you can see that the race came off first. So the race goes over the cone. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because I've heard many times where these bearings get put in upside down. So the cone would go into the race, is what I'm assuming, and it can go back together in this direction. That's not sliding in there very well, but it can happen. So that's just something to keep in mind, that when you put one of these back together, that the cone goes on first, and then the race over the top of that. So there's our lower bearing. Of course, just a spherical roller bearing like any trailer axle bearing or something. But we'll inspect that. It's a good idea when you rebuild one of these pumps, just to put new bearings in it. Now this is our upper section. This is where our pintle is. And see, our pintle, this is where our pintle levers are hooked to. And that's what turns the swash plate. You know, when you pull and push on your levers. So if we look inside, and I've already got one bearing out, but see how that swash plate moves back and forth. And that's what we're moving when we push and pull on the handles. And that's what gives us our forward and reverse motion. So let's pull this upper plate off. So it's not uncommon for these upper seals around this pintle shaft, and we can actually see this one's got a lot of rust down here right where this seal rides, and we can even see inside the seal that there's a lot of rust in there. So I'd be real surprised, or I actually am surprised that this one is not leaking, or there would be oil all over the pump. But yeah, we'll definitely replace those seals, and that's easy to do inside the machine. So if they're leaking over the top, we replace those seals. So no big deal on that. That's pretty easy to do. And now we've got our other bearing. Same thing, race goes over the top of the roller side. All right, now we got our center shaft. We're going to go ahead and pull this center shaft out, our actual pump drive shaft, real quick so that we can get our swash plate out of there. We've got an outer snap ring on this outer bearing right here. And see how we can just push that whole shaft out. And we've got another snap ring here holding our bearing on place. So that's another bearing that we want to inspect and replace if necessary. Now our swash plate will now tilt up and pull out of the housing just like that. So now I've got the swash plate out. Let's see if I can get my knife and get this thrust plate up I was talking about. So see, if you didn't know what you were looking for, I mean, that looks like a pretty good surface there. But this real thin thrust washer is what needs to be there. And without it, you know, it's not a not perfect enough surface, I guess, for the slipper to run on. See, that's how it would run. So this is a very important piece. Don't forget that. It runs on there just like that. So just like everything else, it's really important that this plate is in really good condition. And unfortunately, just like the heads of our slippers, we've got a lot of wear out here on the outside of it. I can really feel that, you know, with my fingernails. So yeah, charge pressure issues all the way through that. There's nothing destructive in this pump. It didn't do like a catastrophic failure, but it is pretty much worn out. So we would have low charge pressure issues, and I would say probably hard steering maybe on this pump, just based off the evidence that I've seen so far. This is our swash plate assembly. I mean, really, the only thing that ever goes wrong with these is sometimes we have damage to our pintle shaft up here where our pintle lever is loose and it kind of wears it out, or we even had some pumps that had a smaller diameter head on there and it would break those heads off a lot because the steering was improperly adjusted. But other than that, there's really nothing else to really inspect or look for on the swash plate. So that's pretty much it for that half. Now the other half of the housing is going to be almost identical. One thing that we do want to take a look at, let's set this off to the side. So this is the plate that our pump housing bolts to, right? And our shaft goes through the center. So remember, each pump has two functions, both forward and reverse. And this is separate from the hydraulic system. And why that's, I don't know, important or whatever, but you know, our hydraulic system, our lift and tilt have their own relief valve. The hydrostatic system has its own relief valves in the pumps. So each function, both forward and reverse, have a high pressure relief. And those high pressure reliefs are found in this section here. Allen head plug. So there's one on this side. See that plug? Got a little spring in there. Let me see if I can pull out the relief valve itself. So here's the relief valve itself, and that's how it kind of goes together. You can see there's a lot of rust on this one because that's the top part of the pump. So usually it does get full of a lot of debris and rust, and these plugs are usually really difficult to get out. But you can see how thick that spring is. So this sits on a seat inside the pump, and if we exceed, usually these are about 5,000 psi, so if we exceed 5,000 psi, the pressure would push back on this, collapsing that spring and allowing pressure to go over to relief and back to drain. So we'll inspect those high pressure reliefs. I mean, there's probably nothing wrong with this plug, but it is really rusty and really deteriorated. So I would probably, if I'm going to rebuild this pump, we're going to replace all 4 high pressure reliefs. Or maybe not all 4, maybe just the 2 upper ones, because let's take a look at the bottom one. Here's the lower high pressure relief. You can see how much better this plug looks brand new compared to the one that was on top. But that's just the nature of the way it's sitting inside the machine itself. So yeah, this one's in much better condition, but same principle. So one is going to be a forward high pressure relief, the other one's going to be a reverse high pressure relief. We do have a needle bearing inside here that we can push out and replace if need be. So the rest of this is just plugs. These are our outlet ports to our drive motor. So there's nothing else in this half, but there is something I want to look at on the other half. It's what we call our charge pressure relief. So I know in these systems we talk about charge pressure a lot, and that charge pressure is controlled. You know, charge pressure goes throughout the whole entire machine, but the charge pressure is actually controlled with a relief valve inside the left-hand pump section. And we'll see that right here. So same as this, a plug. We can see here's our high pressure relief for the opposite side. And then there again, of course, one on the bottom for forward and reverse. So let's see if we can get out this charge pressure relief, and we'll talk about that for a second. So now on our charge pressure relief, we get that pulled out. And here's what it's made of. You know, when you can't order these parts individually, you'd have to order them all together. But what happens is how we set this is it already has a predetermined amount of tension on that spring. We'll drop shims down inside of here, and these are kind of stuck in there, but there are real small shims. Each shim that we add, you can only buy one size, I think, from Bobcat, but each shim is basically an 8 psi increase of difference. So you add shims to increase charge pressure and remove shims to decrease charge pressure. So that's kind of the only other thing, you know, in this half of the pump that's different than the other half of the pump is that's where we find our charge pressure relief. So what I'm going to do is just a quick tear down of this half now, and we'll just kind of inspect it and see if we see anything even more worn or damaged on this side. So, yep, this will be just a quick tear down. This is our main pump shaft seal that we're going to replace anyways. I just put a small hole in it and rip it out. Main drive shaft. And our swash plate and our swash plate shim. Get it back out. Or thrust washer. Same thing with this thrust washer. See if you can hear my fingernail dragging on that. Yeah, I don't know if you can see. You can see the wear on the outside of it. So this is just dirty oil contamination in this pump, and it just wore it out. So this would be easy to rebuild. You know, no big deal on that. And then last thing we can look at is our valve plate itself. And again, I know we looked at this just a minute ago. We already talked about our relief cuts in there, but feeling again, we can see how deep this groove is. I'm scratching it with my knife, but see how it catches there on the end? Not sure what that is, a little piece of trash. So yeah, so this would have to be replaced. The rotating group would have to be replaced. We put all new bearings in there. Of course, all new seals, gaskets. This swash plate again is in good condition, so nothing wrong with it. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's easier to get a reman pump because it is cheaper to buy a reman pump or get it rebuilt than what you can rebuild it for yourself. So that's usually the downside, is to rebuilding them, is because all these parts are expensive. This one needs both rotating groups, both valve plates. I mean, essentially it'll be a new pump after we rebuild it. So the only thing good really is the castings, and you know, the bearings are probably pretty good, and the swash plates and what have you. So we'll get it priced out and see if we can rebuild it, but hopefully that kind of helps you. It kind of shows you what the internal components are, and if you took one apart, maybe you can put this or use this video to help you put it back together. So we're going to look up some parts and see if it's worth rebuilding. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for watching.